everybody, Ira Miller here with I Am Realty. Today we're going to talk about closing costs. So it just came to my attention recently when one of my sellers were asking me how much their closing costs were going to be, and they were surprised when they learned how much their closing costs are. But this is not just for sellers. This is for buyers as well, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So in the contract, there is a provision in the contract. It's on page 3. It's paragraph 9, and paragraph 9 of the contract talks about closing costs for the buyer, and it talks about closing costs for the seller. But mainly right now I want to talk about closing costs for the seller, because the seller basically bears the brunt of the closing costs in a real estate transaction. The buyers have very little closing costs that they have to contribute when they're purchasing a home here in Florida. So I don't know about other states. We're just talking about Florida, and we're talking about also in the Villages area in particular. So what does a seller have to pay? Well, number one, they have to pay documentary stamps to the state of Florida, or we call them doc stamps for short. The state of Florida charges the seller $7 per thousand for a real estate transaction. Now, why are there documentary stamps? Basically because there is no income tax here in Florida. So the way Florida gets money for its budget is through the sale of real estate and in the form of documentary stamps. So for instance, $7 per thousand means for every $100,000 of the price of a home, the seller will pay $700 to the state of Florida. A $200,000 home, they're going to pay $1,400. A $300,000 home, they're going to pay $2,100 to the state of Florida in the form of documentary stamps. Now, we do have also something called title insurance. The seller pays for title insurance for the buyer, and so the seller might ask, why do I have to pay title insurance for the buyer? Basically, what you as the seller are doing is giving the buyer an insurance policy that says if something might happen to pop up, like a lien on the property somewhere along the line that the closing company did not catch, then that's when the title insurance comes in. And for instance, just for an example, a $300,000 home is going to cost you $1,575 as a seller when you're selling your home. Now, for buyers, if you're a buyer and you're mortgaging, you're taking out a mortgage on a property, you're going to pay, Mr. Buyer or Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you're going to pay title insurance to the bank. And typically it's about half the price of what a seller pays for title insurance for a buyer, because it's almost along the same lines as the same policy. So that's why it's about a 50% discount when the buyer is paying title insurance for the mortgage company, for their mortgage company. All right, so now what other closing costs are there for a seller? Basically, the seller has, in a normal residential real estate contract, they have responsibility for repair items. So in this paragraph 9, you're going to see provisions in there of what the limitations are going to be when a seller has to make repairs to their property. So the default amount is 1.5% of the purchase price in general repair items, 1.5% of the purchase price in WDO items, which used to be called termite inspection items, and then another 1.5% for permitting in case there was an open permit left out there that was missed. and didn't get a final approval for the permit. So those are the three main costs to the buyer in the form of paragraph 12, which is where you'll see all your general inspection and repairs for a real estate transaction. Now, what I want people to know, and what a lot of people out there don't realize, is when you're dealing with a developer, when you're dealing with a new home, right? So now you're dealing with a seller who's a developer. That developer is not going to pay the doc stamps, the title insurance fees. And so there's also other things in a new home like impact fees. Impact fees is what the county charges for new homes when a builder or a developer builds a new home on a raw piece of land. So different counties have different costs for impact fees. As a developer in a development like the Villages, they're going to pass that along to you, the buyer. Okay, so now you, the buyer, are going to pay the doc stamps that sellers normally pay. You, the buyer, is going to pay for the title insurance. You, the buyer, are going to pay for impact fees. And you, the buyer, are also going to pay for a new home. You're going to pay for connection fees. So a utility company will charge for the connection of a new home connecting to their system in the form of sewer connection fees and water connection fees. So all those fees, which are normally, those connection fees and impact fees don't really factor into a pre-owned transaction, basically just a new transaction, a new home transaction. So keep in mind, when you're buying a new home, like in the Villages, like in On Top of the World, like in Del Webb Stone Creek, if you're buying a brand new home, there's a lot of fees that a lot of times they don't tell you about until you get right there to that closing table. So just keep in mind that you're not just paying the price of the home, you're paying also all of these closing costs. And I would probably say you're upwards of around $15,000 for a brand new home is about what you can figure on top of what you're going to pay on the sales price of a home. And then again, in the Villages, you have to factor in what that bond is going to be. And so the Villages are pretty much the only community around that has these bonds that are passed along to the buyer. And today, in a new home, you're probably looking at about a $40,000 bond, which translates to about $2,500 a year more on your taxes, because that's how you pay your bond. You pay your bond in with your property taxes. And again, it's probably about an extra $2,500 on your tax bill to pay off this bond that you don't see in any other community around here anyways. So these are all closing costs and costs that I really felt like I needed to do a video on to make everybody aware of these costs that you don't normally see or hear about when you're purchasing a home. So I hope this video is helpful. I hope you keep what I just said in mind. The last thing I do want to make mention is when you're buying a pre-owned home, in the Villages especially, as a buyer, you're not going to have to pay doc stamps, you're not going to have to pay title insurance fees, you're not going to have to pay impact fees, you're not going to have to pay sewer connection fees, water connection fees. These are all things that are kind of exclusive to a buyer with a new home. So again, please keep that in mind. As far as the bonds go in the new area, like I said, they're around $40,000. If you're looking in a pre-owned area in the Villages, I think you're probably going to find that the most you're going to pay, I would say from Highway 44 and north, is around a $20,000 bond, about half the price of what a new home is today. So just wanted to have full disclosure of all the closing costs of what those pertain to, so you have all the information, and that's what we like to provide here in Homes Around the Villages YouTube channel. So if we can be of any help to you, maybe clarify anything to you, please give us a call. You can call us at 352-204-9026, or you can simply email us at homesaroundthevillages@gmail.com. We'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions if some of this is not very clear to you. All right, and then lastly, that number I gave you, 352-204-9026, you not only can call, but you can text to that number as well. So thank you for watching. Don't forget to make comments down here. We love to hear what your comments are and see what your comments. And I want to thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you in our next video.